Welcome to the first episode of Book Talk, as we discuss J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye.
For our first question, we'll discuss just the first time we read Catcher in the Rye. When was it, and what were our general first impressions of the book?
Okay, so my first time I read it, I was in college, and I'd heard of Catcher in the Rye. I'd never read it in high school, and so I'd heard it was very famous, and it was countercultural and all that, so I thought, well, I'll read it and see what it was. And I have to say, at the time, I was very underwhelmed by the book. I had no idea why it was so popular. I just didn't get it. I mean, it didn't seem bad. It just seemed kind of meh. And even at the time, I thought, well, maybe I missed the window that you really should read this for the first time when you're a high schooler the same age as Holden, and I was too old to read it. So, because I was probably 21, I'm thinking, when I read it. So, yeah, I was very underwhelmed the first time I read this book.
I had similar reactions to it. Actually, I didn't read it until my 30s. Again, it was one of these where you see it, and like, oh yeah, how did I miss Catcher in the Rye? This is a classic. I need to read this. And I had an even stronger reaction against the book. I couldn't stand Holden. I thought he was a punk. It's like he's just some whiny brat. I really didn't care for it at all. Not just like, oh, I don't see what the big deal is, but wow, why do people read this thing about this kid?
When did that change for you then, though? When did you start to
A lot of it changed. Some of it changed on the second reading of it, when I was reading it again to teach it. And then it changed even more with the teaching. I think always in teaching a book, you approach it in a different way. You dig into it more deeply. And I just really came to pity and then care for Holden. More and more I saw what a bad situation this young man was in. As I read it again through and tried to find connections in the book, I really saw kind of how masterfully he was kind of a punk, but that all had reasons behind it. It all had purpose behind it. He's a very deeply injured young man.
Yeah, well, and I think like most punks, if you probably dug a little underneath the surface, you would see that this is coming from a place. No one just chooses to be a punk. It's coming from oftentimes a place of damage. And so I probably read it for the second time. I was probably in my late 30s the second time I read it, and I couldn't even believe it was the same book. I noticed different things. I had a totally different take on Holden. Maybe I was too close to it at Holden's age, just old enough to think I was wiser than this kid. And so I didn't understand it at all when I was 21. And then when I was in my 30s, I really just saw how much of what he's dealing with and projecting as a facade. And then I could also appreciate the structure of the book, maybe something I didn't even pay any attention to before.
And that's something that really changed for me on rereading it, is just one of the reasons I dislike Holden so well is because this is such a well-written book. You really get into his mind, into his psyche. You're stuck in it. It's kind of like Dostoevsky, who's great at sticking you in the mind of a character you don't necessarily want to be stuck in.
Right.
And just the voice and the mastery of voice throughout this, and the mastery of point of view. I think, again, on rereading it, every time I read it again, I appreciate more that this is an absolutely expert writer able to do this.
Yeah, because I think, and I know you and I have talked about this, that one of the great things about this book, and I think why it's so famous, is that the point of view is done so well, is that whether you like Holden or you hate Holden, by the end of this book, he seems like a fantastically three-dimensional character. And he's not just one note. You see these kind of punk notes, but these moments of despair. You see these moments of true love and happiness and sadness, and it's all in there. We see definite change throughout, that you might like or dislike Holden as a person, but he's definitely just a fully fleshed human in this text, and it's incredibly difficult to do that, especially when he doesn't really bounce off that many people. You're just stuck in this guy's head, and if he was a flat one or two-dimensional character, this would be an unbelievably frustrating read.
Yeah, and I would kind of go along as a person and human, even those words you talked about this. I think this might be the most fully human literary character I've ever come across.
Yeah. I don't know if I would say that, but I do agree that he's
Well, I
Voldian.
challenge you to find a better one than Holden Caulfield.
Well, I always talk about too is like a mark of a great book is if you hate the character but can't stop reading it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's probably up here somewhere. Sophie's Choice by William Styron. It's in here somewhere, I don't know where. But anyway, that was a book that the first time I read it, I hated the main character so bad. And then about halfway through, it's a huge honking book. It's like 600, 700 pages. And at the halfway point, I realized this book is genius because I hate the protagonist and I can't stop reading the book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think there's maybe an echo of that sometimes here. Where he is so frustrated by Holden, but you want to see what happens to him, and you kind of start to care about what happens to him.
Which makes you think if any of our lives, any of our thoughts were just put down on pages for hundreds of pages, would all of us be kind of
Right,
equally annoying
exactly.
and flawed as Holden
Yes.
Caulfield?
Yeah,
I know I would be.
I know. If someone published your journal, or if
Yeah.
someone like was a little voice in your head typing down every thought, which is basically what he's doing here. I mean, really, what he says isn't that much better, but sometimes his thoughts are even worse. But they're not meant for anybody to know except us. We know it, and so. You're exactly right. It's kind of unfair to judge him on these thoughts when I think if we were all judged on our thoughts, we would all be found lacking.
Or if we could all be as completely open and honest
Right,
as Holden
true.
is in the telling of this.
Right. Yeah. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.